How you doing, folks? It's Martin Kelly here with GSD Global Media for a slightly different one-off special. As today is Father's Day in Ireland, I wanted to sit down with one of my original mentors. Obviously, through doing the podcast, I'm privileged to speak to a number of people across the world, and some of which have become mentors of mine. He's not who he is there. But I wanted to talk to the guy who started it all. And that, of course, is my dad, Martin Kelly Sr. Thanks very much for joining us.
It's a pleasure, Marty. Thanks for asking me.
My pleasure, and happy Father's Day.
Thanks so much.
And in starting off, Dad, can we get a little bit of insight into your early years in dogs? How did you first get involved with German Shepherds as a breed?
Well, I'm no different to a lot of your other guests that you've had on other podcasts, to be honest. Just multi-generational. I grew up with German Shepherds. I was surrounded by them like all my childhood. And through my teenage years, my father used to have German Shepherds. He used to train them in obedience, and he was in that section. And then my grandmother before him, he grew up with German Shepherds, and my grandmother used to have them as well. She never really got into the areas of showing or obedience. They just kept pet dogs, and they bred a couple of litters. She was more a stock breeder at that time. So really, my story is no different to so many other people in that it was just, lineage.
A family involvement.
Yeah.
But you were the first in the family to really uptake the ring craft side of things. So how did that come about? How did dog showing come about for you?
Well, my dad used to train a lot with Tommy Flaherty and man-sized kennels, and then there was a couple of friends that he used to train with. But there was one particular friend that used to straddle both sides. He did a little bit of working, trials, and then he did some breed showing. So he straddled both camps. And just as a kid, when I used to tag along to some of the events, then I used to see my dad's friend in the show ring and exhibiting these dogs, and then you see them being given trophies and ribbons and prize cards. As an 8, 9 year old kid, you're saying to yourself, "Oh yeah, I like the look of this, and maybe I'll give it a go."
And in those early years, obviously, your dad, granddad, was a big mentor to you from a husbandry and a conditioning perspective. But in those early ring craft years, who were your main mentors? Who were the people guiding you through it?
Oh yeah, well, I can't go forward on that until I basically, tip the cap to dad. He was a huge influence and teacher in terms of temperament, and also then about the trainability of dogs and conditioning and just husbandry, keeping them, feeding them, keeping them right, conditioning them. So ultimately, hats off to dad. He gave me a great exposure from that in the early days. But in terms of where I went, from going into showing, I joined, the All Ireland German Shepherd Dog Club, and we used to have training classes on a Sunday morning. I used to go to the training classes, and with my first bitch that I got as a birthday present from my mum and dad, I was 10. That's not to tell anybody how old I am, folks. And we went along to the training classes, and it was there that I met Betty and Margaret Furlong. For anyone that wouldn't know them, they were huge exhibitors, a big kennel back in the 1960s and 1970s in Ireland, famous Avonbeg kennels. They had many champions, and they were just, so supportive, so helpful to me as a young guy. Maybe they just seen the passion, the desire, the willingness in me, and they just supported me and gave me, such help from the early get-go.
And as you start to progress through, obviously, in your early years in the ring craft and in dog showing, as an exhibitor, when did you start to feel you got some momentum and some early days success? Was it as a breeder? Was it as a handler? What did the success or momentum look like for you in the early days?
Yeah, well, you must remember, I was only in school at that time. I was just going from national school into secondary school. So breeding and, even exhibiting, wasn't huge, on the radar. So for me, it was really more about, handling. That's where I started. And I used to take people's dogs at the training classes, and then it just basically moved over then to the shows. When the shows used to come up, when I was a member of the club, we used to have 3 shows a year, the open shows in the spring and the autumn, the champ show in the summer, and then people would ask me then to handle their dogs. And it really then just grew and went from there.
It's fair to say handling was the first love. What was it about handling?
Oh, I just love the thrill of competing. Like, I have other loves in life in that I love rugby.
Yeah.
And I used to be a very competitive badminton player when I was younger as well. So I love competing. So German Shepherd showing is unique in the way that we train our dogs to go out, to go on, and particularly when you're in a breed specific environment, a breed ring. Although I do enjoy, also straddling the all breed side as well, because we do some showing there also. But there's nothing like a breed specific event, a big grass ring, that open space, the element of double handling. I know that a lot of people don't get or understand, but we do in the breed, and that brings an extra level and tier of atmosphere and that too as well, competing with your dogs. So that was just, it for me. I just love the thrill of competing. And also because we compete against each other in our breed, handlers and dogs. You watch a judge, you're following a judge around. Are they looking at your dog? Is there a chance that I can make a place or two here? So you're using whatever techniques and that you learn to make your dog look that little bit better just at that right time.
And on the point of honing your craft, were there any handlers at home or abroad that you took particular inspiration from? Obviously, back then you would have had the likes of Mary Buckley, Margaret Furlong at home. Probably a little bit further afield, it would have been the likes of Malcolm Griffiths. And then even further again, from the Ray Vision videos, the Seeger Show, you would have seen the likes of Dieter Verse and so on.
Yeah, well, look, ultimately, absolutely all those people like were there, but we'll keep it in and segmented. As I was becoming more exposed to the wider German Shepherd community outside of Ireland and getting my eye in and becoming more familiar with what was happening in Germany and German Seeger shows, yeah, I got the Ray Vision videos. But to start off, first and foremost, Margaret Furlong and Mary Buckley at home domestically here would have been the handlers and the mentors that would have given me the greatest support and help and taught me in various elements of handling. Then when I travelled a little bit abroad, then when I met Malcolm Griffiths and that, when we got some dogs off him in the past, and then you learn from Malcolm, and Malcolm would be technically a very, very good handler. And some people would say he's probably one of the best, of his generation. And then the Ray Vision videos, I used to just love watching them, and they were nearly worn out from constantly watching them. You would see handlers like Dieter Wurst, handling Dingo and Hauskiro, handling Isov and Bergmannshof, his ability, his skill in order to be able to present these dogs. Then there was another handler that I used to really love watching on these videos, and that would have been Wilfred Bergert, I think was his name, and he handled Uran von Versteigerland. And then, of course, you had Warner and Walter Posters, who handled a lot of Wienerau dogs and that at the time as well. And so you learned an awful lot technically just watching, observing, and learning.
And in terms of those great handlers, obviously you've mentioned the likes of the technical skills of Malcolm, the likes of the really solid foundational practices of Mary and Margaret. I know you obviously cited Victor McGuigan as well, and in previous conversations we've had for being calm and collected, and it's all about the job.
Well, Victor was the king of cool when it came to handling in Ireland. He was a huge Elvis fan. He always wore black hair, black t-shirt and that, but Victor had just great style, and he would hardly ever touch a dog. And when he would need a dog to move or go into a certain stance or structure, he would just flick the lead one way or flick the lead the other way. He would never really fuss over a dog. You'd hardly ever see him in a lot of cases even touching a dog.
And in getting back to the point that I was looking to make with this, what would you say is the common threads among them all that make them a great handler?
Yeah, well, ultimately, they know dog structure. A great handler knows dog structure. So when it studies a dog that it's taken into the ring and it watches it, so it knows that maybe it has a bit of a shortcoming here or a bit of a shortcoming there. They understand what they need to do to present that dog to its best. From the stack, from the move, from the working the class. And they know ultimately then what they need to do with that dog to present it to its best. there are many, many good handlers out there, but then there are some that I genuinely believe are just born with that inherent skill, and it just gets nurtured and brought out of them. And then those handlers are a little bit head and shoulders above the rest.
And taking all their learnings and their teachings and just observing them, putting that into practice in your own style, that obviously culminated in some good results, some great days out. What would you say have been particular highlights for you of your handling career today?
Oh, I've had loads. It's very hard to quantify because we're looking over decades, really. It's very hard to quantify it. I had some great days out with our own dogs, and subsequently you have had as well with our own dogs. Dogs that I've handled then for other people. Like we've had multiple group winners in the all breed scene ourselves. We had a show a number of years ago where Ryan Amass, the SV judge, was judging, and 3 of our females won their breed classes under Ryan Amass. We went on then to win the breeders group and then best breeders group in show. So that was a great day. I also remember handling a dog called Corrievale Amigo. He was an Arco Hunograph son that went from Ireland. He was sold. He ended up at the German Sieger show in '92, and then he was subsequently sold from the Sieger show. I handled that dog in Ireland. I was his handler, and ultimately he made VA in Japan. That's where he ended up. And then, of course, there was Regensberg Zara, owned by my very good friends. And we had some tremendous good days out and some great victories in that with as well. So, that's just to name a few. There are many other dogs in between there, but that's just to name a few.
And get back to the point of handlers knowing good dog structure, that and being able to evaluate their dogs and obviously hide some of the less, I suppose, desirable qualities and promote some of the more desirable qualities. That translates into a judge's eye as well. And that was something that you got started on quite young by most standards. You started judging at about the age of 17. So what was it that, I suppose, what were the circumstances or the context of that coming about?
Well, it wasn't something that was on my radar, really. I just loved competing with dogs and handling dogs. So, that was, but I had joined the GSA as well. And the GSA was a very forward-thinking organisation when it was set up initially by John and Mary Buckley, who then became very good friends and lifelong friends. And they were pioneers in what they had ultimately set up to do. They had gone to Germany, they had looked at the system of the SV, Landesgruppe, Ortsgruppe, and they tried to bring this model back to Ireland. And as a result, they subsequently set training groups up all over the country. And they were very much focused on the total German Shepherd. And we had that in Ireland then at that time. So we had the working aspect, the Schutzhund, but John and Mary were also very heavily involved in bow camps. And they also very much liked the breed show element as well, because they did show dogs back in the 70s and they used to compete in England at the likes of the BAA shows. And so they had all that, hindsight and foresight. So they had a huge focus on, they wanted to educate, they wanted to inform, and they set up the seminars, judge training programs, all that within the club. And they just supported and encouraged me to come along to these events. Brian Wooten, I remember a number of my judge training programs was under Brian. And he came over and did hands-on assessments and examinations, and it was a great time. It was, great learnings. And subsequently, having passed all my assessments, then I was offered then a breed show appointment at the GSA Ortsgruppe show in Limerick, which was a great experience for me at 17. Probably, as far as I know, could stand to be corrected, I think I was the youngest ever to judge a breed-specific show event then in Ireland at that time.
And going from those beginnings to now, how has your judging process been refined and sort of developed over the years? So talk us through your, I suppose, process for assessing the dogs. Do you evaluate them as they're coming into the ring? Do you wait till they're obviously presented to you as in an individual? In terms of placement criteria, is it your own personal type preference? Is it those that most conform with the standard? Talk us through how you assess the dogs, how you place the dogs.
I think you're trying to bundle a lot of information into one question there, so like, let's just try and stretch it out a little bit. So when you're judging dogs, ultimately the breed standard is your template. That is what you measure your dogs against. So the breed standard is your guide. When you're standing in the middle of the ring and you're looking at dogs coming in, yes, you'll make mental notes when you see dogs coming in. You might see, but overall, you must remember you're looking for a functional working dog. So you're looking for overall harmony. You're looking for overall balance. Sometimes dogs present that to you like just straight away. So that's how you're visual when they come into the ring and you make mental notes. But you must remember that you're looking at the breed standard. This breed standard was designed in order to measure your working herding dogs, the German Shepherd being a trotting dog against. So yeah, you make your mental notes, you do your individual examination, you check your teeth, you check your testicles for the males, and then you call out your initial orders as to what you've seen from the stand exam. Sometimes you might misplace dogs and then you actually see. Sometimes you might get a false sense when a dog is in a stack and then you actually see the dog moving and actually the dog moves better than it did when it stood. So these are all factors you have to take into consideration. Another thing I think that we have to be conscious of when we're judging is that we don't always look at the negative and fall into the trap of fault judging. Ultimately, there's no perfect dog. Every dog has virtues. Every dog has faults. It's about comparing each dog against the standard, then each dog against each other, and then on the margins, making your decisions or your alterations based on the margins or the differences that you find with these dogs.
And in terms of the dogs themselves, if we look at maybe when you first judged up until one of your more recent appointments, how has the breed and the type of dogs changed to when you first started to now? I know, as you say, it's over a number of years and it might not be an easy question to answer, but I suppose in a general sense, what sort of trends have you seen in the developments?
That's a very broad question. We're talking about decades, like ultimately since I started in the breed, which would have been in the early 80s. Although I grew up with the German Shepherds in the 70s, but actually started competing in the early 80s. The way I quantify it would be this. We see in the post-war era from the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and we seen various SB presidents and various, dogs that were shown, and you could see that the breed was still very much in a developmental phase. Then we see in the early 80s, then Herman Martin becomes the president of the SB. And we definitely see his vision or his plan for the breed, and in my view, we see a standardization of type. We also then see his promotion of blood-related families, because this is what he's trying to do in order to get that standardization of type. Then we look into the 90s and then beyond the early 2000s, and then we start to see then sort of trends, fads, styles, divergence from the standard. We all know everybody has an opinion on the German Shepherd dog because of its hocks, because of its hind angles. Everybody, whether they're in the breed, whether they're not in the breed, whether it's Joe Public out in the street, whether it's people involved in other breeds, everyone has an opinion. We're one of those breeds that everyone has an opinion on. So the way I look at it is we have a pendulum motion, just like a clock. So for me, the sweet spot, we have people that will always talk about, back in the great old days when we had 400 and 500 dogs at a show, or 150 dogs at a show. Yes, we did. But we didn't have 400 or 500 dogs of top drawer quality, or we didn't have 120 dogs of top drawer quality. We had some really good dogs, then we had dogs of medium quality, and then we had dogs of lesser quality. But we had numbers and we had more exhibitors. So for me, the sweet spot was in the 90s to the early 2000s. You look at old Ray Vision videos or old photographs or old video footage people may have of shows, you can see that there's a drier, firmer aspect to the dogs. No exaggerations, nice short hocks, and we had that elasticity in ligament and musculature, and we had these dogs that were so well able to trot, and they did it with power, they did it with dynamism. They weren't overbuilt, they weren't heavy set. We did have an issue with size, absolutely. Sometimes males and that we did have an issue, and but that's tried to be addressed. So for me, we have fallen into the trap of fads, trends, and styles. There have been steps that have been trying to address that, but Rome's not built in a day, and it's like a great ocean liner or a great ocean tanker. It takes a long time to turn a ship like that around. So it's only by, generation after generation of putting the right steps in place and the right breeding methodology in place to try and reverse the problems that have happened. And if each breeder does that individually, then the rising tide will lift all boats, and we will find that problem will become less and less.
And on the point of breeding, and although what you've said is very cognizant of a breeder's mindset as well as a judge's mindset. Obviously, our kennel now is hopefully going to have its 7th generation at some point in the near future. When you were when you were establishing Honeysoft German Shepherds, what was your initial aim, your initial vision, and was there sort of any other breeders or kennels or dogs that you've seen that sort of formed the basis for the blueprint of what you were trying to do?
Well, originally, breeding wasn't a major thing for me. I was just a competitor. I was a handler. So then when I decided then that I wanted to get more as a competitor with my own dogs, then there were certain kennels that out there that I liked the type of dog that they bred. It sort of fit more into my mind's eye of the type of dog that I'd like to keep. So we went out and we got a female from the Bedouin kennels, and then we had another female then as well from the Gaelic kennels in the UK. They were very successful breeders, they were very successful exhibitors, and as a result, very much they had the type of dogs that we'd like to breed or that we wanted to exhibit. So then it was just a question of then when we decided then that I wanted to breed and start turning into a breeder, that I had a little bit more, scope. I'd gone to a couple of German Seeger shows. I'd been exposed to the world famous Wiener dogs, and looking at a man like Walter Martin, who bred consistently, type and quality of such success over such a long period of time. Although it took him nearly 40 years to get his Seeger and his Siegerine, and when I seen Vanta Vina out for the first time, she, for me, even today, embodies the yardstick of what I've looked. So I had in my mind's eye then what I wanted their type of dog to be. So it was basically a dog that was, very well balanced, harmonious, and, without exaggerations. And I like a bit of pigment. It's not something that I would penalize a dog for overly when I'm judging, but just in our own dogs, particularly, I like to see some pigmentation and, good temperament. I like them to be movers. Do we get that every time we breed? No, absolutely not. No breeder does. Anyone that tells you that is telling you.
That's it. That's it. We don't have a PGA on you.
Yeah. Is being liberal with the truth. But so from that point of view, that was the vision in the mind's eye. And so as a result, and I love one of the quotes from some of your podcasts where some people say breeding in generations. Breeding is very rewarding if you stick to the task, and it's improvement over generation, and you're starting to improve. You're making your bloodline combinations, you're selecting your stud dogs and the blood-related families behind the stud dogs. And you know what's behind them, and then you know what's behind your females. And that you hope that these combinations are going to draw the results. And it's improvement over generation over generation.
And on that point of breeding being rewarding, what has been your proudest moments as a breeder so far?
Well, we've had a couple. Yeah, like we have had a couple, particularly, some of our own dogs that have represented the breed as well across the all breed sphere as well, where we've won groups and we've got into best in shows, and we've had two females that were shortlisted, a best in show 3 and a best in show 4. They're very rewarding moments, not only for us as breeders, but also they represent the breed, across the wider dog show community, and that they can see that there are sound, dogs that represent their breed and are able to compete at those levels. But one thing that will always stick in my mind is our, as we call them at home, our champions litter, the litter that we had with 3 puppies, where we had Cunningshaft Black Caviar, Man of War, and Sagittarius. At 8 weeks old, when we were doing our evaluations and we were looking at the puppies out here in the garden, and we basically said, yeah, like these are 3 really nice puppies. These are 3 good quality puppies. These are worth the effort, and we kept the 3 of them, and then we brought them on and we trained them, and all 3 of them became a champion. And it was only the second time an Irish breeder had ever accomplished that. 3 champions in the one litter, and it was some 34, 35 years previous. Only one other breeder had managed to do it. So that for me is a great source of pride.
And in terms of going over our kind of trajectory, I think it's been over about a 25-year span in the breed. A lot's changed in the breed in those 25 years. And one thing that we do see a lot of commentary on at the moment is obviously in certain parts of the world, the decline in nature of the sport, the numbers are going down, not just in German Shepherds, but indeed across all of dog show. And it's probably not fair to ask on a global context, but even on a general commentary, what do you feel is influencing the decline? And do you feel there's anything we as exhibitors, everyday exhibitors, can do to try and claw it back a little?
Yeah, well, 25 years is sort of what I'd say to you there is the level of work that's going to build the bitch line that we currently have now. I'm probably talking over decades in terms of my experience in that in the dogs, and going back like to the 80s. So, we're talking about like such a lengthy period of time. I don't think there is a one fit answer to that question, personally, and it's a difficult one to answer. I think if I was to give you my opinion or my insight personally, we have a load of external factors. We think, ultimately, the world is a different place to what it was 30, 40 years ago. People's priorities are different, in terms of their, professional activities, maybe, their incomes, the external factors on the pedigree dog show community, and multiple faceted things. Now, I don't know in terms of other sections of the world what their dog scenes are like. I can talk about Ireland and I can talk about, Europe tentatively. We have many external factors. We parts of Europe where they're, trying to ban certain breeds. Our own breed here in Ireland is segregated into a particular cohort of breeds that's sort of legislated for. I don't think maybe our breed is as popular as it used to be as a pet. The reason for that being, I also think the other factor that we came through a global pandemic, and then we've seen designer breeds, and designer breeds seem to be pushed more to the fore. So there's loads of different aspects there. But the one thing that I would say to you is, I think even though we are seeing numbers decline, there are still a few diehards still hanging in there. And particularly we see it in Ireland. We need to survive before we can thrive. We need to take and harness what we have and just try and make the best we can of it. Whether that's we do get support from other breed societies, all breed societies, where they try to provide us with breed specialist judges. I think we need to support them as best we can where we can. I'm not quite sure, because of the social and economic factors, that as many people want to be keeping dogs as competitive dogs anymore. So we've seen a drop off in the amount of people showing dogs. So I think we just need to sort of band together and try and survive and make the best of what we have. I do think, and this is just a personal view, I do think that from a holistic point of view, that our breed clubs in Ireland need to be doing more than what they are.
As someone, as you said, it is a case sometimes of making the best of what we can, and looking for the joy in some of these moments. Just looking over your lifetime in dogs, what has this sport meant to you? What has it given to you on a personal level?
Well, look, the sport has given me, well, I will say, ultimately, my love of dogs, from the time I was a boy to what it is now. I love dogs. Our own breed is number one, of course, but I love all sorts of dogs, and I can see the fascination in other breeds as well, like whether it's gun dogs or other working breeds, whatever. All dogs, they're man's greatest friend and woman's greatest friend. And, so I can see the broad dynamic in that. So for me, I just love keeping dogs. I love the companionship of dogs and, what they bring for us as a family, because we compete and we show together, and your mom has been a great support as well over the years. And she came from a competitive background in a different breed, but she supports us in all that we do. So it makes us a very tight family unit. And ultimately that brings another level of enjoyment to us because it's something we share and we all do together. It's taught me patience. It's taught me, to be able to take the knocks, because we have to be realistic. These are living, breathing, animals that we deal with. So not everything goes to script. Even though the best laid plans can go crapper. So, you might have bitches that miss when you planned a litter like for, 6 months or a year. So you may have all those things that happen. So it gives you, patience, resilience, intestinal fortitude, and also then friendships. I have met some wonderful people, great humanity in my time from various countries with this breed, and friendships that have lasted a lifetime.
And on a parting note, as we come to the end of this interview, just because he's my dad, he doesn't get any exceptions, folks. And our traditional closing out question.
It's Father's Day. There has to be a drink to be had.
What advice would you give to anyone new in the sport starting out?
Don't do it.
And just like that, all my work promoting the breed down the drain from my own father.
No, seriously.
Like, seriously, don't do it.
Yeah, seriously, don't. No, and seriously, on a partner note, what I'd say, like, for anyone that's thinking about it, research the breed and make sure it's the breed for you. There's loads of educational content out there, on YouTube, there's various publications. I think for anyone really starting off and wanting to get an understanding, I think Lewis Donnell's book, The Definitive German Shepherd, I think is a volume of work that, young, old, amateur, seasoned, or whatever should have. So for anyone that's looking to start out, it covers everything. It spans everything, and that would be an absolute for anyone if they can, sit down and read that book. If you decide then that the dog, the German Shepherd, is for you, then go to shows, go to training events, see the type of dogs that you like, get in your mind's eye, that this is the type of dog that I like, or this size of dog, or this color of dog, or whatever. Then you see the breeders that are at the shows, the exhibitors, and them that are being successful. And then you can talk to them. Everyone is very approachable. You go and talk to them, ask them about their breeding and what's their plans. And the other thing then I would say is, if you can get good mentors, supportive mentors, positive mentors. There are elements of the dog show game that can have a little bit of a negative underbelly. So try and avoid those if you can, and get supportive, nurturing mentors that will give you a positive experience and that will just encourage you to continue, with this hobby, with this activity. Because remember, folks, this is a hobby. For most of us, this is a hobby. And we're not at this professionally. We all have professional careers aside of it. So the idea of taking your dogs, taking them for walks, going to a training club and then going to shows has a social aspect for you too, that you want to do it in a positive, nurturing and supportive environment. So that's as much as I could give in terms of advice to anyone that would be looking to start.
I'm sure they can take that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, listen, I want to say thanks very much for doing this Father's Day special. I know it took a bit of persuading, but thanks for doing it, and happy Father's Day.
Hey, you're very welcome. It's great to be here, and happy Father's Day to all the other fathers that are out there listening.
Yes, indeed. Happy Father's Day to all the other GSD dads out there. Well, folks, that's the last of our one-off specials now for a while, and indeed the last of the podcast for a little while. We'll hope to bring you some live streaming from some other GSD events. But we're going to take a little bit of a break from the podcast for a little while, but hopefully I'll be back very soon with some fresh content. But in the meantime, I just want to say again, thank you all very much for tuning in. Thank you to my guests, my dad.
Ciao, folks.
Father's Day special. And we'll see you all again very soon. And in the meantime, take care.